Hey guys, Simon here from Bluff the Spot, and today we're going to be talking about a pretty popular topic, and we're going to be talking about blockers. We're going to talk about how much they matter when it comes to formulating our river decision making, how important they are, should we be putting weight into blockers, should we not, and we're going to be taking a bit of a deep dive into this. Now, before I jump into this, I want to let you guys know that we still have jimmyduraide's tips for how to crush 3-bet pots. This is still, you can get a free copy of this. All you need to do is check out the link in the description below. So I highly recommend you guys check that out. Really, really valuable stuff. And with that out of the way, let's jump into it. So blockers, everyone likes to talk about them. Quite often when I see other regs talking about their decision-making process, one of the first things they do, particularly when it comes to bluff catching, is they like to talk about the blockers. How much do their side cards make a difference in terms of like unblocking, blocking bluffs, unblocking, and blocking value? And this is normally like the first port of call for a lot of people when they get to the river. They start thinking about how much does that second card matter in terms of blocking bluffs or not, and how much it actually counts in terms of the pair that you have in terms of blocking value. And I'm here today to talk about the spots that don't really matter for blockers and the spots that maybe do matter for blockers. And the typical thing is most of the spots that we play in are typically going to be wide range spots. Most of your spots that you come up with, and they're going to be like the bread and butter of playing poker, are going to be wide range spots like small blind versus big blind, button versus big blind, like single raise pots, and typically broken lines, something like bet check bet or check bet bet. Not a lot of triple barreling, but those lines where it goes there's a bet and a check within it. Now, I've got a sim here I want to show you guys to help kind of talk about my point. And this is a blind versus blind spot. And this is going to be like a small blind spot versus the big blind single raise pot. And we've got the board of ace 8 for rainbow. Now, I've got the 25% c-bet strategy. You guys could c-bet this range, but we don't really want to talk about the flop. We kind of want to get to the river. So it goes bet, call, and we get this king on the turn. And I'm just going to let it go check, check to keep the ranges pretty wide. And we're going to get this deuce of clubs, and we're going to see two different bet sizes here on the river that are predominantly used. We can see there's the 33% sizing, and we can see there's the 75% sizing. Now, I think we're going to use the big sizing for this, so we're going to click that. And this is kind of how the big blind would construct his defense range. Now, we're going to go into the range explorer here. And we're going to start looking at what the kind of defending thresholds is and when blockers start to make a difference in a theoretical kind of simulation. So we can see straights, sets, two pair. We don't actually have almost many of these, but they're always raising. We then get to top pair, and our strongest top pairs are raising, the worst ones are calling. Second pair is also always being defended, a little bit of folding with king 9, but basically always calling with second pair. And third pair is where we start to see that blockers start to make a bit of a difference. We can see that we really like having the high card in the queen, and we really like to have the low cards, the 5 and the 6. And we really don't like the 8, the 10, and the jack. And the reason for this is if we go back and have a look at the betting range here, we can actually see that a lot of these jack X, 10X, even 9X, most of the combos used for bluffing. So when we have those cards as the big blind, it actually makes it more likely that, it's when we have a 10 or a 9 ourselves, it makes it less likely that the small blind is bluffing. And so these hands that are indifferent to calling because they're pure bluff catchers, they don't beat value, they only beat bluffs, start to make sense to fold. And our third pairs with the better blockers or unblockers to bluffs like to call. But we got to remember that when we look at Pio and we look at these sims, this is only a theoretical lens. And this is only what happens in a Nash equilibrium state when the solver plays itself into oblivion. But what actually happens in reality? What happens when we're playing against opponents that underbluff or overbluff by a lot? And most people overbluff or underbluff by more than 1 or 2%. It's normally quite a few more than that. And what actually happens to our third pairs in this case? So if we go back here and we have a look at this bet 67, we're just going to create a quick subtree to make things a little bit easier for ourselves. Okay, build tree, okay, and go. Cool. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at this sizing here, and we're just going to add a few extra bluff combos here. So we're going to set strategy, and all we're going to do is we're going to select, what we're going to do is we're going to select none, and we're just going to select our nothing, no draws, and these are our bluffs. And you can see that the solver isn't bluffing everything, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the percentage points of this by a bit. Now, I just want to raise like this overall range by about, 1-2%. So we're going to get it up to, that's about 1.5% here, or maybe a little bit more. And we're going to lock. And so all we've done is add some extra bluffs into this big sizing. We're going to lock all, save and close. And we're going to give this a quick run again. Should take 2 seconds, it's just the river. Click go. Cool, and we're all done. And so all we've done here is we've increased how many bluffs that the big blind has. And we haven't even increased it by a whole lot. It's only been like 1.5%. So we now click this big sizing. And now what happens to the big blind's defending range? And if we have a look at this range explorer and we go back to our third pairs here, we can now see that no third pair is folding. You can see there's 0.5%. But basically, as soon as the small blind is over bluffing by more than about 1%, like 1.5%, blockers actually don't make a difference. We can see that all of our bluff catchers now like to call. If we go down to our low pairs, these are all calling too. So we can actually see that all of our bluff catchers are basically always calling now. And this is all due to the big blind just slightly over bluffing. And the opposite goes the other way. If the small blind is actually like under bluffing by 1 or 2%, all of a sudden would be folding all of those 8x. And we can show that if we go back here, tree, and we're going to set the strategy and lock the node. And this time we're going to change how much, we're going to actually change the bluffs, and we're going to make it the small blind under bluff. So we go back here, select none, and we're going to go into the nothing, no draw. Okay. And we're going to go back, and this time we're going to make it something like this. Lock all, save and close. And we're going to run this again. Go. All right, let's have a look at how this performs now. Click this big bet. And all of a sudden, look at all this folding that's going on. We go into the range explorer, select our third pair, and we can see almost none of our third pair is actually calling. And it's only actually getting raised as a bluff here. Even our second pairs, these hands that were calling pure originally, because they're a pure bluff catcher and the small blind is under bluffing, they're no longer calling. It now needs to be top pair where we actually beat value until we actually start calling again. And this is a very important concept. So the first thing that what I like to do when I get to the river is I like to think, is my opponent over bluffing or are they under bluffing? And this helps to formulate my decision-making process. I don't spend a ton of time thinking about blockers, how much they affect the bluffing range and value range, because ultimately, in reality, in these games that we play against unbalanced opponents, we should be trying to do everything we can to exploit their exploitable strategies. And a lot of this involves making decisions around whether things are overbluffed or underbluffed, and not spending so much of a time worrying about what our blockers look like in a river decision. Now, I've spoken for a bit now about why I think blockers aren't super important, particularly in a spot like this. And the most common counter that I have to this is, what about in tight range spots? What about in spots where there's not that many combos? In a spot like this, there's still quite a few combos. There's like 35, 40, 50 combos on the river. And so, blockers aren't as important here. But what about in a 4-bet pot? And this is actually correct. In 4-bet pots, blockers do start to make a bit of a difference, but still only to a certain extent. So I've tried to run actually a pretty similar tree here for a 4-bet pot. I mean, obviously it's not going to be the same, but small blind versus big blind, 4-bet pot this time. And we're going to be looking at the same board. So we've got ace 8-4 here, and we've got the small betting strategy, and we can already see on the flop, the ranges are obviously a lot tighter because of the pre-flop action. We go small bet, call, king, goes check on the turn again, and we're going to go that deuce on the river. And here I've just got a small bet and a big bet. And again, we can see the solver is mixed in between the two sizes. And for the purpose of this, we're only going to be looking at the big bet to make it as close as possible to that first scenario. So we click the big bet here, and we have a look at the range explorer. And if we start having a look at the combos, we can see obviously straight, sets, 2 pairs, always calling off. We get to top pair, and in a 4-bet pot, top pair, a lot of like the value range here is like ace king, aces, ace queen. So having this ace is super important, and it blocks like quite a lot of value, and it makes sense as a call. And we have a look at the second pair, king queen calling sometimes. It's a little bit of a mix, and king five folding. And king queen, the queen here is quite important as a blocker because ace queen is a really big part of this small blind's value range. Whereas the 5 only really blocks bluffs, like something like maybe 5-6 if it got in there. But it's not really super important for blocking value, so we don't like it as much. And then we get to our third pairs, and we can see these are just like mixing, and they're not great as calls. But in order to remain balanced, they call sometimes. All right, so we have a look at that, and let's now mess around with how much the small blind bluffs. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to go and we'll just create a quick subtree. Okay, go. So we're now going to be messing around with how much the small blind bluffs. So we go to the tree, set strategy, lock node, select range, and what I want to do is I want to select all of our nothing, no draws. These are our bluffs. And you can see here that actually all of our nothing here is bluffing in this 4-bet pot. But we're actually just going to change how much nothing bluffs for the big sizing. So we're just going to start over bluffing for the big sizing. And we're going to change it by, what was it here? We're going to change it by 1%. Something similar to what we were doing earlier. Cool. Lock all, save and close. And all we're going to do is we are going to run this again. And we come back here. And now let's have a look at how much the big blind calls. And we can already see here, king, queen, king 5, queens, jacks, 10s, already all calling. So even in a tight range spot here, we can still see that these blockers don't really matter a heap. Once and we can see king 5, which was a break even, like losing call, is now making quite a lot. It's making 12 big blinds here as a call. So it's making it even in these tight range spots, this concept of blockers is still not super important when we start seeing the small blind over bluffing only by 1%. Now, if we have a look at it the other way and we start looking at under bluffing, we will just have a quick look here. Set strategy, select range. We're going to go back and we're going to select our bluffs. Nothing, no draw. Unlock all. And we're just going to move this down a little bit. We're going to keep some bluffs here in the big sizing, but not very many at all. And we're just going to do something like this. Okay, lock all, save and close. And we're going to just click go again. So we've now reduced the amount of bluffs from the small blind's perspective. Big bet. And we can now see that even some ace X is now folding. Okay, so even in tight range spots, these ideas of blockers and how much we should be calling, and we can see none of these king, queen, pocket queens, pocket jacks make any money as a call anymore. And this all has to do with how much the small blind is bluffing or not. So when we do get to these decisions, yes, even though ace 6 and ace 7 are pure bluff catchers, because of the blockers to the value, they still do call sometimes. So in these tight range spots, this hand is still a pure bluff catcher, but still needs to call a little bit to remain unexploitable. And in these tight range spots, blockers do start to matter a little bit more. It's going to take quite a lot more over bluffing or under bluffing for blockers not to matter. Because of how many combos, there's only a few combos in the big blinds, value betting range, these blockers start to matter quite a lot more. Now, they still don't matter once the bluffing gets over 2, 3, 4%. Once we start to see kind of thresholds like that, and in your games, that's likely what you're going to be facing. So unless you think that your opponents are super balanced, they're playing the river really, really well, which I assure you, even at 501k, guys are not bluffing unexploitably. The first thing that we shouldn't be thinking about is blockers. Hopefully this has given you guys a bit of an understanding of around how this concept works, why I think blockers aren't super important in most spots. And hopefully this can help you guys out in your own game. I hope the audio quality's been a little bit better for this one. I apologize for the last video. There was definitely a bit of an echo in the room, so I've got it closer to the mic closer to my mouth this time. Hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have, please leave a comment, click that like button and subscribe. Until next time, I will catch you guys. Cheers.